Hello, and welcome back to Dr. Hollowed. In today's episode, we'll be taking a look at seemingly unexplainable and paranormal encounters people had as children. Please remember to like and subscribe.
This is one of the few vivid memories I have from my childhood. I was around 10-11 at the time, so my memory is a bit hazy, but this night is scared into my brain. Our old house was a tiny terraced 3-bedroom house. The layout of the bedrooms put mine and my 8-year-old brother's shared room right next to my baby brother's room, with my parents being at the end of the hall. As I mentioned, it was a small house, so having my 1-year-old baby brother in his crib in with my parents wasn't an option, hence him having his own room. So this one night I wake up to my baby brother screaming in the room next to me. This was not an unusual occurrence, as I'm sure anyone who has had a baby sibling can attest to. So I roll over and try to shut him out, as my parents would normally tend to him right away. I waited and waited, but he just kept screaming. I then passed back out. It was one of those sleeps where it felt like I just blinked, as before I know it I'm awake again. 2 hours has passed in the bat of an eyelid, and still my brother is screaming. This is totally surreal, as I'm sure half the neighborhood must have heard him. Then I realize something else. Between his screams I can hear a strained whisper of someone shushing him. Very, very faintly. I don't recognize the voice, and it doesn't seem to be having any effect. I jump down from my bunk bed and my younger brother is completely passed out, which again is odd, like I'm the only one hearing the screams. I open my door and can't see into my baby brother's room at all. His door is wide open, but it was just pitch black, like there was a black sheet hanging from the door frame. My baby brother is belting at this point and I can still hear the shushing. This is when fear grips me. In my brain I'm sure the shushing must be one of my parents. It has to be, I can hear it so clearly. But I just stand there paralyzed with fear. I eventually move, but turn and run to my parents' room. They are both fast asleep. I shake my mom awake and she is super confused, but then instantly hears my baby brother and runs into his room. I watch her, and as soon as she walks through the door, the black veil is gone and she lifts him from the cot and cuddles him. He stops crying and I'm just in complete shock. I don't really process what's happened. After this my memory is hazy. I know I spoke with my mom, telling her what I heard, but I can only assume she told me to get back to bed, as I don't remember any else distinct. This is the only paranormal event I've witnessed. Now I chalk it up to lucid dreaming, night terrors, but it was still very unsettling, especially as it was so uncharacteristic of my parents not to attend my brother when he was crying. I watched a lot of X-Files when I was like 7, so I had a lot of nightmares, and my grandma gave me this crystal bell to put on my nightstand and ring when I had one so my dad would wake up and come in. One night, I woke up to someone/something standing by my bed and I thought I'm having a nightmare that an alien is in my room. I need to ring the bell to wake myself up and reached over to get the bell and the thing pushed my hand back. I just fell back asleep, and when I woke up, the alien was gone, so I assumed it had been just a dream. When I got up, I noticed my bell was gone and asked my dad if he knew where it was. He said on my nightstand where I left it. I looked all over my room and didn't find it, and when we moved, never saw it. No idea what was in my room or where my bell went. Not my experience, but a weird paranormal event happened to my little sister when she was about 5 years old. This event scared the living fuck out of my family. So my uncle died about 15 years ago in a fire in his home. My little sister had just been born. She must have been about 3 weeks old. The day before his death my uncle visited our family randomly because he had yet to meet my little sister. I still remember his visit very vividly. He seemed a lot happier than I had seen him in a long time. He was a sweet man, but he was plagued with a lot of issues. However, I digress. The next day he sadly died in a fire in his home. 5 years later, on a warm summer's night my sisters and I decided to fly kites in our backyard. Keep in mind we had just moved into a new home where the property was shared between my dead uncle and my grandparents, so our backyard was the site of my uncle's fiery death. So we're all outside flying kites when we decide it's late, so we should head inside. Inside our home my little sister tells my dad that a man was looking for him in our backyard. My parents were terrified at the idea that there was a stranger on our property talking to my little sister. My dad went outside and scoped out our property, which is pretty big. He found nothing, and I think my parents just took the event as a made-up story by my sister. So a month later my mom was hanging up family portraits in our new home. When my little sister took great interest in one of the photos. This is the part that really creeped us all out. She told my mom that the man in the picture was the same man that was looking for my father on the same night that we were all flying kites. My mom's face went white. She asked my little sister if she was sure, and she said yes. My little sister had no idea who the man was. As it turns out, the photo was a picture of my uncle who died in the fire. My mom shared this with my dad, and honestly this was the second time in my life that I had ever seen my dad cry. The first being when we ran to his brother's house as it was burning. We were actually there before firefighters could reach his home to put out the fire. We don't really speak about the event anymore. I think my father interpreted the whole event as my uncle trying to reach out to him to give him closure. My little sister barely remembers this even happening. Personally, I was always a bit skeptical, but this still freaks me out. When I was a teenager, I think about age 16, can't quite remember, but I had what I thought was a dream that I was drowning. Head completely underwater and couldn't reach the surface. I could feel my breath leaving me when someone pulled me up, and I was in this strange, warm and loving place. People walking around, and it was very bright. Someone walked by me, looked me in the eye like they were startled. Then said, "You aren't supposed to be here." I didn't want to leave, but they kept insisting that I wasn't supposed to be there. The last time they said it, that added, "It's not your time," then pushed me back into the water and pushed my head under. I woke up gasping for air like I would if I had been drowning. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I never told my family about it. When I was a little girl, during my dreams, different people would come visit me. We would talk, usually about a topic they brought up. I visited with all kinds of people, young, old, and from different times in history. I really enjoyed it and thought that's what dreaming was all about. I didn't know anything different. When I was in college, my grandmother died. Within days she came to me in a dream. We had a really nice visit, and it was just as I had always visited with others. I woke up and a bolt of lightning hit me with the realization that the people I had been visiting with over the years were people from the other side who were dead. I was literally in shock for several weeks, and I couldn't get my head around it. After thinking about it for quite a while, I decided one night that I would lay down and meditate and see if I could recreate my dreams in a way that I stayed awake, but was able to communicate. When I did this, I was immediately flooded with people. It felt just the same, it was just like my dreams. As a result, over the years I've been visited by many people that I now recognize as dead. I can be awake now, anywhere, like a grocery store, and someone, an energy, approaches me. It's all evolved, like I've grown with this ability. I'm now able to clearly communicate, and I generally ask after we meet, "What can I do for you?" Because I've realized over the years they come to me for a reason, so I just cut to the chase. Sometimes they will just be lonely and say, "I just need to talk," so I listen. Many times they have given me messages to take to their relatives or even a specific person. I've learned to do that in a way that shares the information with the relative without saying, "Hey, your mother said to tell you." I say it more like, "I think if your mother were here she would tell you. I'm sure of it, no doubt that's what she would say." I've also spent a lot of time with specific energies and have asked them many questions about life, origination of life, its meaning, etc. So paranormal to me is a quiet reality. It's like a front door. I can open it or keep it closed, but it is reality. Interestingly enough, only a few people know about this. It's a very strange thing, and the fear for me in telling is one, I don't want the pressure of people knowing. I'm afraid that would open up Pandora's box. I'm not interested in any notoriety too. I don't want to be seen as different. Funny, I can post this on Reddit and feel comfortable about it. It's an extremely private, personal thing that I've only shared with only a few people. My husband is the only person in my family that knows, and I probably wouldn't have told him except both his parents, especially his father has come to me several times. When I was very young, probably 6-ish, I was sleeping in my twin bed when I suddenly woke up and looked out through my open bedroom door. The hallway light was on. A very generic witch silhouette was present, coming from down the hall. As I stare at it, it lets out a very generic witch laugh. Then, I hear a phone ring, like a landline type of ring, and the witch gasped lightly and went to get the phone. I freaked out, ran out of bed, and to the door, which was now closed, despite me not actually seeing the door close. I remember there being a cage-like thing over the light switch preventing me from turning it on, and the door being locked from the outside. Then my mom opened it and comforted me. Very weird, I'll never forget it. Ooh. I've got another one. When I met my now wife, she was living in NYC and I in SF. We first met in SF when she was visiting family and proceeded to spend a week together before she headed back east. A week later, her best friend and I flew out to New York for wifey's birthday. This was late August 2001. Now, I've been flying my whole life. My mother was a stewardess and I flew fairly frequently growing up and have, and do to this day, find it to be a fun and even exhilarating experience, especially takeoff. Anywho, we board the plane, find our seats, and buckle up. And I begin to freak the fuck out internally. Like, tears welling up from fear, freaking out. I was completely terrified of flying all of a sudden. It shocked me how afraid I was because another part of me was stoked to be going on an adventure. I look over at my wife's BFF and I tell her I'm wigging out and I don't know why. She tells me that she's extremely anxious too and that usually flying doesn't bother her either. Fast forward, we fly there, have a great time, and then have to head back to SF. Get on the plane and it's the same shit. Totally petrified to fly. Plane's kind of empty, we have rows to ourselves and are remarking over the seats that we are both tense as shit and don't understand why. Flight goes fine. The following week the missus flies back out to the West Coast so we can be together. 9/11 happens. Due to the shock of it all, she extends her stay until things chill out in NY a little. I decide to fly back a few days after she goes home because despite all the shit we are still in the honeymoon phase and don't want to be apart. Time comes and I get on the plane and nothing. I'm cool as a cucumber, not tripping about flying in the least. I'm kind of awestruck that I'm feeling fine. Logic told me if I was going to be nervous about flying that now would be the time, not before, given the events and fear that followed 9/11. I still think about that whole experience and wonder if somehow I was picking up that something was going to happen. Oh yeah, that was also United Flight number 93. I know it's the internet and this could seem incredulous, but it's God's honest truth. Freshman year of high school, one of my friends in band was hosting a Halloween party at her house deep in the woods and invited half the band. About midnight during the party, we started the haunted tour. She took us down a dirt road and we followed her blindly in the dark until we reached a medium-sized pond. She began telling a ghost story at the shore. I don't even remember what the story was, but to the right, on the opposite shore, everyone saw a pale purple figure slowly drifting between the trees. It wasn't reflected on the water, and made no sound despite all the leaves and sticks on the ground. It squatted a couple of times before moving again. But at the climax of the story and we looked at the dam across the pond, the rest of the party staff did their part of the act, being chased by someone on a four-wheeler and pretending to be run over. When we looked back over at the figure, it was gone. Back at the house, the host said she had no clue what the thing was across the pond and that it wasn't part of the party. The following year, another party, no ghostly figure. The year after that, the staff decided to take what we saw and do it themselves. Back down at the pond, different story, but one of my friends was across the water wearing a bed sheet. I don't know if reoccurring dreams count, but here goes. Since the age of 3, I've had this dream where I'm walking in a swampy forested area colored in monotone gray and browns. There are little mutated forest animals all around, ranging from regular animals with multiple heads or limbs, to miniature Lovecraftian critters. The animals are running around and singing like they're in a Disney movie and they beckon me to come play with them. I keep walking through the forest and I refuse to join them. I'll make excuses like, I don't know how to play these games, or I don't know the words to your song, or I have somewhere else to be right now. They don't harass or abuse me for not joining them. But I reach the edge of the forest, which is this strange vortex shape. It always reminded me of the Looney Tunes / Merry Melodies opening sequence, made of concentric circles of light. The creatures finish their song as I walk through the vortex. At that moment, I wake up, bent over the toilet, vomiting. This dream only occurs as a precursor to catching the stomach flu. I've had it maybe 5 or 6 times in my life, once at the age of 3, then in 2nd grade, then as a teenager, maybe 13 or 14, and then twice in my late teens / early 20s. And every time, I wake up vomiting at the toilet without fail. I don't know how I got there, whether I sleepwalked or if my journey through the forest is a metaphor / my brain interpreting the trip from my bed to the bathroom, with the toilet bowl itself explaining the shape of the vortex. For one 6-month period in the family home, when I was around 12 years old, I had 2 very strange experiences I have never been able to explain or forget. The first one was the worst. I had only just gotten old enough to be allowed / trusted home after school without childminders and given my own keys. Both parents worked until early evening. The agreement was that I get home and lock and bolt the doors, and under no circumstances open the door to strangers. Even if they look like a harmless salesperson. The first parent to return home would ring the doorbell, and I'd unlock for them. It was a nice area, but now being a parent myself, I'm sure I'll be as paranoid. So I got home and locked and bolted the doors. The only other occupant to the house was our golden retriever, Vicky. Lovely dog but thick as a yard of lard. I went upstairs and started playing with my Lego. Vicky followed. You know when you have lived in a house all your life, you know all its sounds? It gets to a point where you can tell who it is walking up the stairs by the subtle differences in the creaks. Yes? Well, this house had an old-fashioned wooden framed, single glazed glass front door. Almost pointless locking and bolting it really. You could have quite easily kicked through a glass panel if you wanted to get in. Regardless, it made quite a distinctive noise when opening and closing. There was no mistaking it. I was upstairs playing quietly with Lego, and that's what I heard. The front door opened, and then closed. I even felt the percussive thud of it closing through the floorboards. It was so normal and so distinct I just stopped to see which one of my parents would shout first, obviously having gotten home early. But there was nothing. Silence. So, still not the least bit alarmed, I went downstairs to greet either mother or father. Couldn't find anyone. After a quick search of the house I concluded neither parents were back, and went back to the front door, and remembered the bolts. They were both still across. Now I get a cold chill. How on earth did that door open from the outside? Or failing that, how did someone leave then bolt it afterwards? With panic rising I did another check of all rooms, doors, windows, even cupboards. Nothing. All was locked up and it was just myself and a trembling Labrador. Why had she not run downstairs like usual? She'd heard it. Her head picked up too when the door opened. There was just no way I imagined it. I heard it open, stopped what I was doing, in an already near silent house, and then heard and felt the door close again. This was not a big house. 4 up, 4 down, typical family detached UK house. I suspect it was likely my rising fear of not being able to even, but the temperature seemed to plummet and the hairs on my arms and neck stood up. I got out of there fast and cycled round to a friend's house. I told him what happened but he laughed and said I was trying to wind him up. I told no one else after this. Second incident, same house, same scenario, a few months later. I came downstairs from my bedroom, and made my way over to the kitchen for a drink. As I walk into the kitchen I am just in time to see the kettle finish boiling and click off. Bubbling hot water. Steam. I had not turned it on. Impossible. I didn't even drink coffee yet, and I'd been upstairs for an hour and this kettle boils in minutes. Vicky was again keeping me company. No one else was home. This kettle had quite a stiff top-mounted rocker switch. You don't turn it on accidentally. Nothing had fallen on it. Nothing could do to its location. The kettle had indeed boiled. It was hot. I was not hallucinating. Memories of a few months ago came rushing back, but this time I fought the chill and got angry. I armed myself with the biggest kitchen knife we had, and returned upstairs and pretended to play like I wasn't bothered. Longest 3 hours of my life. Again Vicky seemed uneasy and wouldn't move, and up until my mother came home I swear it felt like the air pressure in the house had increased and the temperature dropped. Again I told no one. I've had nothing else even close to this happen since. Moved out of that house 2 years later. This didn't happen to me but I heard the story 1,000 times from 2 different people, one of which my best friend, independently. The other was the girl who lived in the house. So some background, I grew up in a small town that has a lot of history. It participated in the Civil War pretty actively and was used as a location where slaves would reach their last stop on the Underground Railroad since it is right on Lake Erie. There are a lot of old houses that date back to the early 19th century and some even into the 18th century. Many of the houses have had multiple lives. Some have been barns, stores, hospitals. Well, this particular house had been an asylum and at one point a makeshift hospital during the war. The asylum time though was particularly brutal and a lot of people died. It is a super ugly house because it is part of the historical society and pretty preserved. I've only been in it a couple of times and you get a super creepy feeling when you go in there. Even in the middle of summer it is often pretty cold. It may be all because of the stories of activity but there is definitely an off feeling. The basement is super creepy because there are still chains in the concrete. Anyway, my BFF when I was in middle school and high school one time had a really horrific experience in the house. Our friend who lived in the house and her were in the kitchen and a knife flew at them. Literally out of nowhere. It scared the shit out of her and she went home and that was one of the last times she ever went back and she refused to go into the kitchen. Apparently some of the other stuff that went on was a lot of knocking, scratching. My friend would wake up sometimes with scratches across her back that were unexplained. One time when I visited we took a lot of pictures of orbs, though I chalked it up to dust. Anyway. This is how the story was relayed to me and if I got any of the facts wrong I apologize because it has been years. When I was younger I used to see disembodied parts all the time, like a set of legs in the hallway and a floating head by the road. When I got older I joined a ghost hunting team as their clairvoyant for a while. I heard and saw tons of weird stuff doing that. I also learned how terrible OG boards are doing that job. Then when I quit the clairvoyant job and moved into an old house I would see and hear things like from the job. I tried talking to whatever was in the house on several occasions before I realized that whatever it was hostile. Only time I ever regretted the clairvoyance thing. I had a friend from the ghost hunting team come and check out the house and whatever spirit was there got really pissed. The only not weird/scary supernatural thing I've seen was the lady who told me about my clairvoyance abilities. She was 98 years old, had a pet duck, was blind in one eye, and wore diapers in bed all day. She told me to dump my boyfriend at the time and that I had spiritual vision. She said a bunch of other stuff that came true over the years. I paid her $20 and hugged her duck. 2 words, ghost cat. Now, my family had a cat and she would love to sleep with me. There were many times I'd feel that familiar jump onto my bed, the circling near my legs, and the cat plopping down to sleep for the night. Except I'd reach down to pet her and there'd be nothing there. Honestly didn't think anything of it and chalked it up to just being tired. But it was strange how often it seemed to happen. Then one day, years later, my family and I were sitting around telling stories and I jokingly said something about the ghost cat that lives in our house. And instead of laughing, everyone got deadly silent. Come to find out, everyone in my family had been having the same experience for years and didn't realize others had felt it too. I was so determined to figure out what the hell was going on that I actually went to the local library for a few weeks trying to dig up old news articles and info on my house. Come to find out, the original house almost burnt down to the ground in the early 80s. No person died that night because they happened to be out of the house at the time and there was no mention of a cat, but I convinced myself in my 12-year-old mind that that family most definitely had a cat that died in the fire that night. I never, ever was one to freak out about paranormal stuff, but I'll be damned if we didn't all experience a ghost cat in that house. When I was 11 or 12 I stayed in a 200-plus-year-old brick home hidden off an old country road in rural Canada. On the second or 3D night I was sleeping, suddenly found myself awake already sitting up in my bed. When I opened my eyes I saw a black silhouette of a man standing maybe 5 feet from the end of the bed just staring at me. Thought my eyes were blurry or I was dreaming, so I rubbed my eyes pretty hard, and there it was standing in the same spot clear as can be. The room was partially lit from a light outside. I flipped shit and called out for my mom and fell off the bed, adrenaline pumping like crazy. She woke up and came to see what was going on. She didn't seem to notice anything so I stopped panicking. I didn't tell her what I saw for some reason and instead said I have to go to the bathroom, which she probably thought was strange considering my age. The only reason I thought it was some sort of ghost and not a home intruder was I was certain that anyone in the room would be illuminated by the outside light to see features, but this silhouette was pure black 100%. Then to top it off, the next morning we are eating breakfast with the homeowner when she decides to inform us that she believes the house is haunted, and describes the exact same thing I experienced. Saying it's happened to her multiple times. She claimed a man killed himself in the woods behind the house decades before. Again, for some reason I didn't say anything and didn't tell anyone for years. I don't believe in ghosts, but that was really fucking strange and I still think about it from time to time. My grandmother died when my mom was a teenager. I never met her. One night when I was 12, after having gotten over a particularly nasty fever, I woke up and had a 40 minutes conversation with a woman sitting on my dresser. I should have been afraid of the intruder in the house, but she seemed very nice and was not threatening. We talked about my schooling, how I felt about mom and dad getting divorced 5 years previously. She told me about my mom when she was my age, etc. My mom came in, turned on the light and asked why I was talking. I explained what was up and described the woman I was talking to. I had never seen pictures of my grandmother. My mom had never talked of her other than to say she died. It was my grandmother's birthday that day. My mom said I described my grandmother perfectly. At that point I had been an atheist for 5 years. I have remained an atheist since. I can only assume I must have heard a description of my grandmother from another family member at some point in time and was still feeling the effects of the fever. But I still have no full rational explanation of the entire event. One of the main issues for me is a couple of the stories of my mom at my age she told me were true. Stories I couldn't possibly know and that she never to anyone. I am still, and always will be a skeptic, but that one still tickles my noodle. Holy fuck, a thread for me. Okay, so these stories made me believe in the supernatural and the best part is that I had witnesses who saw the same shit I did. So me and my cousin were about 13 to 14 at the time and staying in my grandmother's place, right? We just got done watching a movie and we looked to the kitchen because we heard a noise. Now my grandparents knocked the fuck out at like 7 and this was 2 a.m. I see a skinny pale lady in a red dress over the sink and she turns to look at me and she fucking disappears. Now I thought it was just me, but I look over to my cousin and he's kind of freaking out like he's just seen a ghost. So I go, did you see what I just? And he just nods his head. And then I go, the lady in the red dress? Then he's just all nope, fuck you, and shuts himself in the bathroom for a little while. Now I go to my grandparents' room and they are still knocked out. My grandmother isn't white and she doesn't own any red dresses, and she's not skinny. The second story was a few years later. I'm about 16 to 17 and in driving my car doing shit and I see a dude in a black coat staring at me all creepily. He then goes behind a street lamp and I don't see him at all. Now this street lamp isn't big to hide behind, so I don't know how he pulled it off. When I turn the corner to try and see him, he's gone. Probably explained by him messing with me, but I still went home right after. This last story freaks me out the most. So I'm the same age at 16 to 17 and it's about 4 a.m. Now my house gets super fucking dark to the point of pure darkness, but I still know my way to the bathroom. As I'm going to the bathroom, I hear a voice whisper my name in my left ear. All the rooms are to the right of me. So naturally I get a little bit spooked and I look to the left of me, but no one is there in the darkness. I just feel a presence staring at me. I freak out and turn on all the lights in the hallway, but nothing's there. My family are all asleep and not saying anything. After all that shit and some crazy deja vu stories where I called out things before they happen, I believe in the supernatural and ESP or whatever. When I was 13, I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep while taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and then they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch. It opened into a double bed. The same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room. My father went right to sleep. I laid awake, reading a magazine. After a while I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I heard more shuffling feet. Then I heard the fridge door being pulled open and I heard the sound of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Back then they were still putting soft drinks in glass bottles. Feeling thirsty, I decide to get out of bed and go join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen only to find myself all alone. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. Then I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over the neighbor's house and he hadn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather's and father's ghost stories. Then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen, into the living room and leapt over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up with a start, a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side. It took a while for me to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by my blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off of my face. When I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sound of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep. Only to wake up again on my right side. The paralyzing fear was back. Forcing myself to turn my head. The shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. Again I had to summon up all my courage to move my hand to take my blanket off my face, only to find nothing there and the paralyzing fear gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times this happened through the night. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. But it happened a lot. The next morning I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night while he slept. The sounds of the bedroom door opening. The shuffling feet. The fridge door opening. Nobody in the kitchen. Being awakened with a paralyzing fear. The shadow. The heavy breathing. The repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things. But instead he smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma."